Sound is interesting. Obviously it's something that goes unseen, and yet it contributes a massive amount to the final product. A famous quote by George Lucas states that sound is 50% of the film, and to a great extent I really have to agree with. Obviously we had films from a very long time ago which didn't have the capability to use sound like we do nowadays, and yet they were still able to tell their own stories. The Great Train Robbery, for example, a revolutionary film for the way it just visually immerses the audiences, especially the end scene where Justice D. Barnes points his gun at the audience. People back then just freaked out when that happened. They didn't know what to do or say because it was like just so out of anything they could imagine that was real. I mean, back then it was just mind-blowing, and over time we found new ways of immersing audiences through all of the senses, except maybe like taste or smell. Unless there are theatres out there that, you know, you can smell the films. I'd be kind of concerned by it. I don't know, maybe that's a thing. But obviously the most common and less invasive method is sound design. For anyone who's interested in sound, or, you know, maybe you're not all that experienced in it, or you know a lot about it, I would always point you in the direction of Walter Murch. I mean, he was a director, editor, and a world-renowned sound mixer. I mean, he's made films you've absolutely heard of, but have you actually heard them? See, the beauty of sound design is that it's the subconscious means of bringing us into a story, and the majority of time it goes unnoticed, but if you do take the time to listen, you'll find some very creative decisions embedded within. And of course you've been waiting for this aspect, it's the title and thumbnail. How does anime come into this? Well, anime is a visual medium alongside any form of animation or live action content. However, in the world of fiction, you just find yourself dealing with impossible scenarios that you would in the real world. And since animation is just vastly more expressive than live action techniques, the means in order to create a sound design has to be entirely different. At least, that's what you'd think on the surface, and that's why I've decided to make this video. How do anime sound designers accommodate the impossible? Now, I can't cover like every anime ever in terms of sound designing, that would be crazy. I mean, that would probably warrant like its own series in itself. But I think I can establish some cool ideas to you guys in order to just think about sound design way more whenever you're watching a series or specifically anime. I once mentioned that animation is embellishment, and so you'd probably consider sound design to match these creative and over-the-top visuals. A quick summary: Fire Force is about people spontaneously combusting and turning into infernals, which our main characters need to defeat. I did say quick summary. People love talking about the sound mixing in Fire Force, myself included. I mean, it's kind of what sparked the original sort of idea for this video. And I mean, come on, those explosions are just wow. Jin Akutagawa is the sound director of Fire Force, and I mean, he's worked on a plethora of stuff, and there's not much really known about him apart from the fact that he really likes to use sound design within his own storytelling to just amplify everything. I mean, that is kind of the job of a sound director. But the sound effects specifically are mixed and made by Yasumasa Kiyama. I mean, do you like the sound design in Jojo's? Dr. Stone? Kiyama's done those, and a lot more. And I think Jojo's ties into Fire Force really well because they both demonstrate really creative means of amping up action sequences, especially by utilising bass. Bass in itself naturally sounds good to humans because our brains are actually wired to pick up lower tones of sound as opposed to higher tones. And this is why the majority of songs around the world are built of a foundation of lower tones. And what applies to music also applies to sound effects. I mean, think of Jojo's for example. When you hear sound design in that, it's like you're hearing a blend of lower and higher pitched tones, and these two actually complement each other. It's an array of pitches which makes the effects so impactful because it's literally ingrained in our minds to like it. To enhance those higher tones and create some resonance, a lot of shows will also use frequency shifting. It's also called up and down conversion, which basically just means to take a pitch and change it from lower to higher. If you think of it, it's kind of like a drop in a song, and a lot of mixers will also use synth filters to sort of get rid of any unwanted frequencies involved and actually isolate specific sounds, or use a nice tremolo, which is used in a lot of slow motion or dramatic sequences, or they'll use reverb to soften the tail ends of sounds. And these are just common techniques used in anime nowadays because the creators understand just how well it taps into the human psyche. I mean, nowadays we're looking into how the brain responds to specific pitches, all in order to create a more immersive scene. And these are all just examples of heightened audio manipulation in order to enhance the impact. See, layering sounds provides texture to sound design and creates more engagement, and when there's more engagement, there's more emotional resonance within the story. And just for logistical reasons, this is all handled in a digital post-process, as opposed to baking things in analog, which is what you traditionally have in older audio-visual media. And though recording audio in analog obviously provides massive benefits, I mean it has an unlimited bandwidth and you can sort of shape everything within the studio, it's just a lot easier to transfer digitally because that's how the world works nowadays. But if we compare the sounds of, say, Fire Force to these older series, there's a stark contrast to layering and stacking multiple assets on top of each other to amplify the effect. And a lot of the time, Foley is used to match on-screen elements, and Foley is basically when you record audio outside of the set, and obviously because of animation, there is no set. So for example, you may be watching, I don't know, a combat sequence in Naruto, and, you know, every impact, every sort of punch, slap, it's all recorded outside of, you know, the set, again, non-existent, and in a separate studio where they can actually nail the actions, nail the materials. I mean, if there's any metallics involved, you know, the kunai, you'd have metal objects used, or different materials, all to create this sort of texture. And this is where things can get a bit more experimental. I mean, this is where you take different materials or different sounds and mix it to create something new and, you know, perfect for the sequence you're working with. It's these different assets combined which complement the ninjutsu effects and different effects in anime, and it really just ties into a fluid product. And it also helps the Naruto fight scenes because they are just incredibly well animated. Sakuga. And the idea of building all of these sounds is called worldizing, and it's another concept provided by Walter Murch, which essentially means to create a foundation of the world your characters are in through audio alone. And it's all about making it work as a sort of visceral audio landscape, and this is how Apocalypse Now won the Oscar for Best Sound Mixing. Anyway, aside from all the technical jargon and, you know, building the world, let's just go into the anime and ask why. Sound accommodates the story. I could talk about how it's used in Naruto to signify different emotional cues. I could talk about Parasite and how well the design is used to demonstrate the symbiosis between a human and a creature. I'm going to narrow it down and pick something which I think is an amazing example of how sound is used to tell the story in a really effective way, and I'm going to be looking at one of my favourite anime, Serial Experiments Lain. I could talk for so long about this, honestly. Serial Experiments Lain is like, there's a lot to unpack. The story is just so interesting, not only because of the sort of themes, but the sound design plays an integral part in the show, and it's something which I think has inspired a lot of directors since. Dialogue just really becomes merged throughout the series. I mean, the vocals overlap and it's just really disorientating. You have the constant humming of the power lines and the radio waves, the use of warped synth in the hallucinogenic sequences, in the Wired, that's what they call it, the Wired. See, throughout the series, Lain is developing paranoid schizophrenia, and the theme really speaks to me. I mean, this is, again, a subjective thing, you can take away what you want from the theme, but it's about the human mind, body and soul, and our sort of connection with technology. It's representing our identity as though it were technology. I mean, the brain is a hard drive and our memories are data. See, the sound actually matches the decline in the narrative and the sort of decline in our characters' mentality. And this is actually used in a lot of films before. I mean, and a fantastic example could be Raging Bull, where the sound design matches the emotional, you know, disposition of our character. And an element I think works so well with Serial Experiments Lain is silence. I mean, these sounds would just be unbearable and just drowned out if they were constant, and in such an introspective story, it makes sense to keep things as minimalist as possible, and to only present information when it's required. I mean, a great example is when Lain's dad is just typing over Lain's voice, and it sort of represents technology's increased ownership over humanity, because you can't hear her, and it's just the tapping of keys. The alternating worlds of reality and the Wired creates two planes of sound. It creates contrast, which not only makes the story more cohesive, but it's also representative of our characters and their flawed perspectives. And I mean, you have these sort of breaks in between where suddenly you can hear a crash or a bang, And it's a signifier, it's an audio signifier. We're not working with just a visual plane here. And it's about snapping us into existence and being like, okay, you need to focus on this single aspect. And that's the importance of sound, and I think it works amazingly in this show. See, originally when I had this video in mind, it was inspired by anime sound effects alone, but it's really transcended into something more. Like, yes, anime sounds amazing because each series utilises creative means in order to express and emphasise drama, or combat, or environments. But really, all these principles apply to visual mediums. It's not just anime, but I think anime does it so incredibly well because they have so much more to work with and almost a landscape to be really creative and experimental as opposed to more grounded work. And it's interesting because Serial Experiments Lain is still a very grounded piece, and yes, the Wired is involved and there's a lot of metaphysical, philosophical terms and there's a lot going on, but it's still a very grounded thing, and it's about a character who's sort of developing a certain ideology or an outlook into her own identity and reality. But it's still amazing because the audio just works so well to tell the story. And I think it's something that can really work in the live action industry as well, and a lot of people do it. It's taking audio and matching it to the thematic or your character and what they're going through. But with anime, at the moment it's absolutely amazing and it's really great to see it improving, and different creators are bringing in their own audio techniques, and again, there is so much I could cover with this. There are so many ways of creating amazing sound, and so I could make follow-up stuff on this video. But I think I just want to establish to you guys the importance of it and why it works so well in anime. But it shouldn't matter that much about how expressive the means of creating those visuals are. I really do believe great sound design can apply to absolutely everything. It's just about learning and understanding the story first before crafting the world around it through audio. And it just requires a creative mind to do it. But thank you so much for watching this video. I really enjoyed making this one. I love sound and the importance of it, and I think it's something that everyone should, learn more about if you don't already. But yeah, other than that, feel free to subscribe if you enjoyed. And as always, take care.